Welcome to the Korea Pro Podcast, your weekly guide to understanding the most pressing and complicated developments shaping South Korea. We're your hosts, Jungmin Kim,
John Lei,
and Junha Park of Korea Pro.
go beyond headlines as we explain not just what happened, but also what really matters and why it matters.
If you monitor South Korea for work or just trying to keep up, you're in the right place.
This is the Korea Pro Podcast.
Hello, listeners, and welcome back to another episode of the Korea Pro Podcast. It is now around 4:30 on Thursday, March 12th. And what we've seen in this past few days is a continuation of this ongoing war in Iran. Energy prices have just been going up and up and up, much faster than many people expected initially. What eventually happened was that the Strait of Hormuz the ships that are stuck there. The Iranian Republican Guard
There's
Corps.
no movement.
Yeah, they started, apparently they started laying some mines in the waters as well, and they started shooting some tankers. Apparently, the Iranian shot a couple of tankers that were close off of Iraq. And so this has caused energy prices to spike. Now, it's not as high as it was just a few days ago. A few days ago, it was at $113 a barrel. Now it's at $101 or so, but it is quite
It's
high.
still pretty damn high.
It is very high. And so the South Korean government is now in a crisis mode.
Right. So what
Essentially.
are they actually putting forward as measures? So what does Lee Jae Myung put forward in cabinet meetings and emergency meetings?
The very first thing that the president told the ministers of his cabinet to do was to make sure that they are going to have a maximum price for oil, for energy. Now, that is obviously a very quick fire way that's going to help assuage voters, the public, to help make sure that their budgets don't get overly strained. But of course, this is economics, right? If
Right.
you make one sort of concession for someone, that cost is not going to disappear. It's going to be transferred to someone else. And so there's a very good chance that industries might have to absorb some of that shock. But therein lies a problem. Because for those of you who have been paying attention to South Korean news, the petrochemical sector, which is something that I wrote about yesterday, the petrochemical sector has been trying to undergo a lot of restructuring.
Right.
They've had a lot of overproduction. They've had a lot of competition from the Chinese petrochemical firms. And in order to remain profitable, some of them are being consolidated, some of them are reducing output. But in order for this kind of restructuring to happen, the companies that are underperforming have to be taken over or at least consolidated by those companies that still have healthy margins.
Right.
But if Lee Jae Myung's maximum price ceiling goes into effect and the companies have to absorb the cost because of this law, then those companies that were healthy might not be so healthy going forward if they have to absorb all of that loss. And so this is a big issue that is frankly underreported still yet. But this is something that people are going to be talking about a lot more as this war and as this oil shock continues.
Right. So regardless of what Trump's saying about how long this war is going to last or whatever his defense secretary says, the war looks like it's going to go into a war of attrition. So if we see this energy market volatility and also this policy intervention by Matir that's coming in for, the foreseeable future, this is going to put a lot of financial strain on the companies and also the industry. So what's the plan here for South Korea's BOK, for example?
The BOK is not going to cut. It's not going to cut interest rates. It cannot. If they cut interest rates, sure, people will have a bit more spending money. But again, this will cause the market to be heated. You know what happens in South Korea? Anytime the interest rates go down, people say, let's buy apartments, right? Even though the president has been saying that they're going to cut down on, they're going to no longer push for these kinds of tax incentives for people with multiple homes.
Sure.
Still, apartments, real estate, that's the number one return on investment for people in South Korea. And so with all of this going on, I doubt that the BOK will be able to cut interest rates within this year. But the more immediate concern is inflation. Because we import 98% of all of our energy sources. And a significant chunk of that comes from the Middle East. And it's not just oil. The much bigger concern is not oil, it's LNG, liquefied natural gas. The liquefied natural gas, that is a lot less flexible than oil. And that's because a lot of South Korea's LNG comes from Qatar. And those LNG pipelines, they travel right through the same set of waters where all of those hostilities are going on right now. And with the LNG market essentially being a lot more difficult to replace or to find alternatives, South Korea is not looking at a set of very good options. Basically, the shit has hit the fan.
But there is precedent. So I just want you to remind us of what South Korea did in, 1970s or, global commodity boom of 2008. What sort of happened there within the South Korean administration that sort of floated the boat still?
If we are going all the way back to the 1970s, the South Korean government actually had a very laissez-faire approach at the time. They allowed costs to go up, and they just made sure that the economy adjusted. Basically, that meant that the economy was not able to grow as quickly as the South Korean government at the time wanted. And with that kind of laissez-faire attitude, sure, it helped to maintain some sort of a market liberalization. Take it with a pinch of salt. We are talking about the 1970s South Korea after all. But essentially, the oil markets were unchanged. Now, the last time oil prices really went up, of course, was during COVID, right?
Right.
2022. And that was when oil prices were also around $120, $140 a barrel. But the thing about then was that, yes, there was a crunch and there was a global pandemic, but there wasn't a war going on. There wasn't a shooting war. No one was blockading the Strait of Hormuz.
Sure.
And so eventually, while it did take time, that energy source, they were able to still traverse around those straits and those bodies of water. But now it's different.
Different story.
Now, because there are missiles flying around everywhere, and neither Washington nor Tehran are really in the mood to just say, let's stop shooting at each other right now. They are way past that point. We're not quite sure when this will end.
Right. So speaking of when this war will end, we also see a different sector that's being quite formidably or speculated to be formidably affected by the war in Iran. So USFK, the U.S. Forces Korea, it's been reported for the past couple of weeks now that the Patriot interceptor missiles, also just recently the THAAD, the Terminal High Altitude Interceptor missiles.
The one battery that we had here.
Right. And that's being moved within the southern side of the peninsula to unknown base, where media has been speculating, is it going to head to the Middle East or not?
Well, I don't think they're going to Waikiki.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't imagine that. There's not really many things to defend there, except for fish. But we still have some media editorials and also continuous speculation as to how this will actually affect South Korean deterrence against the overriding threat of North Korean ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, what have you. So South Korea currently has its own air defense system.
The MSAM, the LSAM.
Exactly. But of course, the high altitude, the sort of filling in the gaps which the US Patriots and the THAADs have done, this is still a big question mark for how South Korea is going to fill in those gaps.
And it's worth mentioning that President Lee Jae Myung himself has said that he personally does not agree with the move, with these assets being moved out of South Korea, which is quite ironic, given the fact that he's from the Democratic Party, and then that was a party that was really against THAAD to be deployed in the first place. But, different times, different calculuses are taking over right now. But anyway, the president said that, but at the same time, he also said, but it's hard to disagree with Washington.
Right.
What Washington wants to do, Washington will do.
And essentially, it's just a sort of acknowledgement and a sort of concession on South Korea's part, saying that, look, the U.S. is going to employ strategic flexibility of its assets on the peninsula whenever it wants to. Its priority at the moment is not North Korea. It's been far off the chopping block as far as we're concerned. Right now, Iran obviously is the top priority. Their stockpile of missiles, air defense systems, they're all being depleted as we speak by the larger reported stockpile that Iran has. So they will reach out a hand to the South Korean side of the peninsula, how many assets are there. But it's something that South Korea has to realize going forward, that it will have a say, but whether that say is actually taken to heart by its U.S. counterparts, that's a different question.
And the thing that's really bugging me about the movement of these assets away from South Korea is that these are not tanks.
No.
These are missiles that cost millions of millions of dollars. And the United States already has challenges trying to replenish their stocks because of the war in Ukraine. And with this war in Iran going on right now, with more of their missiles being used, these are not the kinds of assets that can be replaced in, say, 3 or 4 days.
No.
It's going to take a long time. In fact, we might have to come to accept that these might even be gone permanently.
Right, and it does, there was a lot of talk on Twitter and from other experts that, the whole drama and the economic backlash that came from China regarding the THAAD system back in 2016,
Yep.
they're saying that it's all poofed now, But at the same time, we have to realize that although the THAAD system, the expected redeployment is a first-time thing, we've seen the Patriot being moved around to the Middle East and coming
Sure.
back to the peninsula. So I don't think it's prudent for us or even sensible for us to actually come to that conclusion just yet. But it is something that is in the water.
And thanks for mentioning that, because the social media platforms on the Chinese side, like Weibo, there's a lot of schadenfreude going on over there.
Right. I mean, it was expected, but I think that it's easy for things to get out of hand in terms of how they interpret the situation, especially from the Chinese side. But as I said, these could be just redeployments and they could just come back to the peninsula. We've seen reports saying that although the missiles have been sent to Osan Air Base, we've still got the batteries, or like the skeleton base for the batteries, still in Sangju or Seongju. So I think it's just sensible for us to just take everything with a grain of salt for now.
Well, you say redeployment, I say cannibalization. Potato, potato.
Right, let's agree to disagree. And then just moving on, so we've also got something else from the Trump administration that just came out this morning on Section 301.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so in the U.S., the Supreme Court ruled against Donald Trump's use of reciprocal tariffs. And immediately after that, the Trump White House, they decided to say, okay, if we cannot use reciprocal tariffs, we will employ other types of tariffs that the White House does have control over. And Section 301 is one of them. Now, what Section 301 does is that it allows the United States Trade Representative's Office to begin investigations into their trade partners to look for any kinds of discrimination that might impact American businesses. And so the U.S. Trade Representative, Jameson Greer, he basically said that the United States will, quote unquote, no longer allow other countries to export their problems to the United States and cause the U.S. Industries to suffer because of it. And so they're saying that they're going to investigate all of their trade partners. Now, Section 301 is the sort of thing that has been usually reserved for adversaries. For example, initially, Section 301 was used against Chinese merchant ships. In fact, this was the same investigation where Hanwha had helped their American partners to investigate Chinese vessels, which eventually got Hanwha's 5 American affiliate companies to be sanctioned by the Chinese government.
Indeed.
But now this very same Section 301 investigation is going to apply to South Korea. Now, it's not only for South Korea. The Section 301 is not being used to target specifically South Korea.
Right, it's going to the EU, India, Taiwan, what
Exactly.
have you.
All of the United States' major trading partners is going to be targeted with the Section 301.
But South Korea has a case on its charts.
South Korea has a few things that is working against it. Now, we've talked about Coupang many times before, so we don't need to go into the whole saga all over again. But Coupang is a U.S.-listed company. And because of the data breach, the South Korean government has said that they're going to investigate what happened to Coupang, that they're going to make not just Coupang, but other companies that actually have data breaches like this have to pay up to 10% of their revenues. And so whether it was by lobbying or some other means, there have been a growing number of voices in America where they're saying that the South Korean government is targeting an American company because it's U.S. listed. And so Coupang is the one thing, that's the most obvious thing. The other big thing that South Korea has to worry about, though, is the National Growth Fund. Now, back in December, South Korea passed the budget, and of the things that were passed in the budget was the National Growth Fund, which President Lee Jae Myung had championed. And now, for those of you who need a refresher, the National Growth Fund is about $101 billion or so, give or take some change. But that $101 billion, that's the plan is to take that money and to help support a lot of these businesses and industries that are meant for long-term growth. Think AI, semiconductors, biohealth. Now, this sounds like a great idea for an industrial policy for any country to have, but when it comes to U.S. trade law, this is a textbook example of a subsidy. So all that the American companies have to do is say, hey, such and such a South Korean company, because of the National Growth Fund, is being supported by the South Korean government, and they can take that petition to the U.S. Commerce Department and say, please investigate. And when they do, they can, especially with Howard Lutnick in charge of the Commerce Department, it would be very easy for the United States to say, okay, we had our Section 301 investigation with the USTR, and the Commerce Department has also done a bit of investigating.
Sure.
And South Korea, this National Growth Fund that you have, it's an unfair, non-tariff barrier that you've got against us at the disadvantage of American companies. So tariffs go up again. And so, yeah, this week, South Korea is finally going to pass that special act for U.S. investments. But even with that legislation passing through the National Assembly this week, if Section 301 still goes ahead, we're still going to be looking at additional tariffs. And on that very happy note, we are going to move on to a much more lighthearted and optimistic topic, the June local elections, because that's so clean and fun.
Right, so the June elections, they'll be the first test for the Lee Jae Myung administration, basically the first major election that will see voters choosing mayors and governors in all 17 metropolitan and provincial jurisdictions on June 3rd.
It's essentially a referendum on the Lee administration, isn't it?
Right. So it's essentially, does the public agree with what the Lee administration is doing or not? Right now, at the moment, polls do suggest, partly or mostly because of the PPP's failure to actually regroup and come into one voice, is that the DP is looking to take charge of at least 70% of all 17 seats. Looking at the main races that we should be keeping an eye on, Gyeonggi.
The mayoral races.
Right. These are the biggest cities and the biggest regions in South Korea where they have the most influence in the level of local jurisdiction that happens, especially the Seoul mayorship. It's been called the mini president. In terms of under law, the Seoul mayor can attend, cabinet meetings. He doesn't have a say in it, or she doesn't have a say in it, but it is still a very prominent sort of high-stakes role that we're seeing the DP and the PPP come together to try and get. But of course, we saw just last week Oh Se-hun,
the incumbent mayor of Seoul.
He said that he's not going to run under the PPP flag.
So he's going to run as an independent, right?
Well, that's what's expected. I think that Oh Se-hun, no one really knows what he's going to do come April when you have to finalize the candidacy. But it does look like he's going to run for a fifth term. On the DP side, you have basically
5 people, or is it 9?
5 people.
5.
5 people. I think the most prominent 2 at the moment is the 4-time DP lawmaker Park Joo-min, who is also the former floor leader of the DP, who has always wanted the Seoul mayorship. And then a very fresh face that was...
Relatively speaking.
Yeah, who was the Seongdong district chief, and he's looking to sort of combat Oh Se-hun to the final third.
Now, why is Chung Won-ho so important in this race?
Right, so Chung Won-ho, he's, as I mentioned, a fresh face in a sea of familiar faces. We've seen Oh Se-hun for 4 terms now. We've seen other DP lawmakers for the past, they're a very familiar face in South Korean politics. But one point to note is that the South Korean President Lee Jae Myung, he publicly advocated for Chung Won-ho on Twitter, where, media saw it as
an endorsement.
Public endorsement of Chung Won-ho's policies and success at the Seongdong district. He actually did quite well. There he was very much applauded for his transparency in his policies. I think that's what Lee liked, and I think that's what Lee's supporters liked too, since they got the stamp of approval from the president. So I think that all the momentum is with Chung to take the Seoul mayorship in the end. Of course, we're still in early days, only,
3 months is an eternity in South Korean politics.
Exactly. Anything can happen. The DP might go for Park Joo-min in the end. A solid figure as well. But yeah, moving on, another key battleground would be Busan. You've got the incumbent mayor Park Hyung-jun, who is still very unpopular with his own city electorate, where his policies have not resonated with the public.
And Busan is a conservative stronghold.
Right. So the DP is looking to sort of mount on that and say, look, we've got Chun Jae-soo. But Chun Jae-soo also has his own risks.
And the way that I look at it, especially with all of these races, the PPP, the People for Power Party, their candidates don't seem to be very strong candidates. Now, in Daegu, we've seen a lot of PPP candidates vying for that job, right? But outside of Daegu, they've not really been all that competitive.
Well, there's a reason for that, and it's because people don't want to run under their flag. They're having trouble finding people who actually want to run for them. So
Because they don't want to end up running and losing.
Right. And also at the same time, the values that the PPP is currently resonating, despite the fact that a couple of days ago it said that it's not going to be pro-Yoon anymore, about 460 days after martial law.
Yeah.
We've
a little too late.
Yeah, I think too late. But I think that's also being reflected in the number of participants and also applications that are rolling in for the election come June. So at the moment for the PPP, it's not looking good.
Okay, so if we look at the polls, like Gallup Korea, the Democratic Party is in its high 40s, and the People Power Party is in its low 30s. But if you look at, NBS, the National Barometer Survey, the PPP is at 17%.
Right.
Now, obviously, there are different methodologies to the polls, but we have to, call a spade a spade. The PPP will require a miracle to just even keep the seats that they have. They're probably going to end up losing more. So let's fast forward a little bit and imagine it is now June 5th, and all the results have come out, and the Democratic Party just sweeps most of these races. How does that leave South Korean politics when the main opposition party becomes just such a tiny force?
Well, the main opposition party in the form of the PPP, they haven't really done themselves any services in that avenue. Look, we've seen the PPP saying that, they're going to change their name before the March 1st holiday. And then suddenly it goes kaput, saying we're going to keep it until after the June election. Same thing for rebranding of pro-Yoon elements within the party. You've still got a party leader that's still issuing out content that finds pro-Yoon supporters on the daily. We've got politicians that are refraining from going under their flag for leadership for these particular reasons. So I think that the PPP, this is just a wild guesstimate, but I think that they could be looking for, a split after the June election if it does turn out as detrimental as the polls suggest. But, they'll still find a way to get a message across to the public saying that, we're sorry, we'll try to rebrand and we'll try to regroup again.
Sure, they're going to try to rebrand and regroup, but here's the thing. The PPP is, just one party. It's been the main conservative party, but it's still one party. But even if this party loses fantastically in the June elections, and they are a shell of their former selves, that doesn't mean that conservative voters will suddenly disappear.
No.
Where do they go?
See, that's the question that's been on my mind recently as to how these conservative voters will regroup or, position their votes in 2028, for example, when the next parliamentary elections are on. We could see new parties coming in, Han Dong-hun, the former PPP leader, who's said that he's been very vocal about these local elections. He's not really positioned himself as a formidable runner, but we could see him coming back in 2028. There's still a lot of conservative voices out there that call themselves moderate conservatives or try to distance themselves from the main opposition in the form of the People Power Party. So I think we could see conservative voters going to them and finding a bit of refuge there until the PPP comes to terms with the fact that it's no longer a formidable force in the political institution of the day.
Okay, I think it's about time that we transition to what's happening next week.
Right, so we'll see a continuation of the ROK US Freedom Shield springtime drills that happen annually. It's set to run until the 19th of March, so we'll probably see at the end like sort of a wet gap crossing drill, or even, I don't think there's any live fire drills that are scheduled at the moment, but we could see that coming into play. We've also got a couple of noticeable committee meetings and also hearings at the National Assembly that are set to come up within the following weeks. So we've got the Defense Committee that will be meeting on the 17th. That's a Tuesday next week. And then the week after, on the Monday, we'll see the hearings for the new Budget Minister nominee and the Oceans Minister nominee.
And we're going to be tracking all of these changes for you, and all of this information will be sent to your email inbox by Monday at 2 p.m. via the Week Ahead newsletter. So if you'd like to know more, please subscribe. Bye-bye.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in.
If you want to know more, sign up for our daily executive briefings. We'll brief you on all you need to know from the past 24 hours and why it matters, delivered to your inbox every morning.
If you want to stay ahead of the curve, sign up for Korea Pro to get a full package of insights, from daily expert analysis to profiles, month in review, week ahead, and more.
And until next time, I'm Jungmin Kim.
I'm Junho Park.
And I'm John Lee, and we'll see you next time on the Korea Pro Podcast.